Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rene Gutierrez. Welcome to the goal planning workshop for Coastline. And we're going to be doing this workshop in the context of summer, the wellness of summer 2020 for Coastline Community College. I hope your summer's going well. I hope you're staying safe. I know this is a very reflective time for everybody. So we're going ahead and talk to you about goal planning, what you can do about it, what are some resources, and really just share. All right. So I'm going to introduce myself again. So my name is Rene Gutierrez. This is my 5th year here at Coastline College. I'm the director of the Intercultural Resource Center.
I'll go next. Hi everyone, my name is New. I am the Intercultural Resource Center lead.
Hello everyone, my name is Louise. I am the mentorship lead for the IRC.
Thank you. We also have Andrea Wasawas, who's not able to join us, but she is an integral part of our team. She's the one who kind of reaches out to our community outreach, our community orgs, and really developing our leadership program. Okay. So, like I said before, this was actually in the context of our Summer of Wellness 2020. So just here, we have listed out a few workshops, actually all our workshops here for Summer 2020, with a list of different items and different things, but also making sure that there's something that's going on every week. You don't have to go to all of them, but we wanted to make sure that our summer was full of programming and full of involvement and full of ways that you can get involved at Coastline College. So we're hoping all these resources are going to be helpful for you, and we're using this workshop to kind of help kick off everything. Okay. Just in addition, right, we call this the Summer of Wellness. This is also based off of the Wellness Wheel. Now, the Wellness Wheel is actually based off of the original Indigenous Medicine Wheel used by kind of native groups from America. And so this wheel represents a view of the many indigenous cultures around the Americas. And while it's slightly interpreted from culture to culture a little differently, it represents the alignment and the continuous interaction between your physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being. And so a lot of the times we notice this is very helpful because when we're looking at our goals and we're looking at what's affecting our academics, it tends to be other things that end up affecting our lives, but we don't necessarily address it. But this wheel and the shape also represents the interconnectivity of kind of one's life, but also that you can do something about it, right? So it allows us to give us some agency on what we can do with our lives, but also look at it in a much more well-rounded way. So when we look at our spiritual and our environmental, our emotional, our intellectual, physical, and social, we have to recognize that all of these things kind of affect our well-being. And I think you all kind of know that kind of experiencing social distancing and COVID-19 and just kind of everyone's kind of mindset right now. So let's talk about what the purpose of this workshop is, so that as you're viewing this workshop, you can think about, well, what am I doing here? So there are kind of a few goals that we have for you in terms of trying to, what to accomplish for this workshop. So the first one being a short-term and long-term goals for you to identify those. When we mean short-term and long-term, our short-term really means like the next 3 months or next semester. Our long-term goals really refer to the next year or so or longer. We want you to kind of know how to keep in mind the environment. So when we looked at the different parts of our wellness, a lot of those are interacting with our environment, the relationships in our lives, and those tend to be really difficult things to keep in mind. The next part is about reflection. So we notice that sometimes we'll make goals, right? Like how many of us have made New Year's resolutions, but then we look back at the year and like, oh, we never really thought about it again because things got hard. So we want to make sure we're going to use time to reflect so that we can make adjustments as the semester or as the year's going on. And also for you to tie in kind of the summer workshops that we have for Coastline and tying it back into your goals. So that it's not just like, oh, I guess I can go to that workshop, but you're going to those workshops with a purpose, with a reason, with questions that you want answered that tie into your own kind of long-term and short-term goals. So I'm going to give you this moment, kind of think about this. What do you want out of this workshop? Right? What are you looking for? What are questions that you have in mind? And hopefully we take this time to really answer these questions. And if we don't, you can always please feel free to contact us later on to kind of help you with that. We have plenty of services that can help you think about goal planning. So as a part of these community agreements, we originally kind of thought about things to keep in mind, which is one, as you're thinking about this workshop, you want to think about what questions you want to be thinking about, right? For the questions that are coming up internally for you about goal planning. You also want to share with other people, but also as we're talking about goals, we want to make sure we're not running over other people, right? We're not just doing it at other people's expenses. So you want to respect people's space and people's time. But also when you're talking about goals and you're talking about kind of the whole wellness wheel, we also want to make sure that we're listening to other people speak when we're doing these workshops and we're doing goal planning, because you're going to need to involve other people as we talk about this. And so along with the active listening, right, is about giving space for people to share, right? If you want to share goals with them, we're also going to talk about listening to other people's goals or sharing those goals yourselves, right? So what does that look like in terms of giving space to one another? Okay, so why are we doing this workshop? Hopefully you've gotten already this far into the PowerPoint, into this presentation, kind of thinking about what you want out of this workshop, but maybe we need to think about what are some of the challenges that come with goal planning. So in general, goal planning can actually be hard. I think in general, we all make goals. Making goals sometimes isn't the hard part. Sometimes it's making the goals that we need to be addressing at that moment and at that time of our lives. Sometimes it's hard to keep that in mind. And a lot of the times, particularly around COVID, right, is that we all were collectively trying to figure out what this all looked like, right? We're doing this all remotely. And so sometimes we went into survival mode, right? Just forget our goals. We just need to kind of focus in and survive, right? Like, what's the next meal look like? How do I figure out being a student while doing things remotely? Do I really want to do this? And so we had to keep in mind our own health and well-being, but also we were expected to still kind of accomplish all our academic goals and keep moving forward. And so I want to make sure that when you're talking about goal planning, it's not really about survival mode, right? It's about thriving mode. It's about how we want to play to win as opposed to playing to not lose. And so those are one of the main points about survival mode, along with making adjustments as the goal's going on or as the semester's going on can be hard, right? If you think about it, it's kind of like a boat that's headed to a destination. Every certain times they have to kind of figure out, recalibrate where they are in the ocean. And so if they didn't keep looking and making those adjustments, they could be way off course. And that sometimes is what happens with our goal planning. We're not really kind of headed towards the right direction. So I wanted to ask Louise and New about what they also notice are challenges for themselves, challenges for other students that they notice when it comes to goal planning.
I can go first. So some things that I notice with students when we talk about survival mode, how important the importance of both long-term and short-term goals. I think for me, I'm not so much of a long-term planner, and so when I focus on short-term goals, I feel like I'm just living day to day. But having long-term goals help me to kind of frame, like, within a year what should I have accomplished. And then I see this within myself as well as students sometimes when they don't know how to kind of frame both long-term and short-term goals.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you mentioned, New. I think sometimes when we work with students, they tend to focus more on short-term versus long-term, or that if they did have a long-term goal, that they didn't see like the breakdown of what that timeline looks like. And so sometimes that long-term goal may end up being unrealistic for them to reach. And so sometimes the adjustment is not made to that goal. And so that goal ends up not being accomplished. And so for me, like, I tend to focus similar to New on short-term goals, and sometimes I neglect to see like, what am I trying to actually achieve with this specific goal, or like, how is this short-term goal connected to my overall long-term goal? So
those are great points, right? Like, a lot of the times, like, it's funny because we'll go through education and just like, I just need to get an A, like, let me get an A without thinking about like, well, what are these grades for, right? What degree am I trying to get to, and how am I developing a path towards that career, right? And sometimes we don't think about that until it's too late. We want to also make sure that we're trying to prevent from you trying to decide your career in the last semester of you being here at Coastline, or matter of fact, like your last semester if you decide to transfer at your 4-year. And I think we already have so many people that are kind of already doing that. So then they're trying to figure it out post-college, which we also want to make sure you don't do. Okay? So thank you for both sharing. So the way we want to start about thinking about this is that in order to start with talking about summer and what that looks like, and we're starting to we want to be refreshed and we want to think about what that looks like, you actually have to first talk about spring. And the reason why we want to talk about spring is because even though you're going into summer, you're not just starting from scratch. There were challenges that you might have had academically or personally that may be following you right into this semester. And so we want to make sure that you're addressing that. So really, in any time when we talk about transitions or going into new semesters, you always need to start with the end. And that means let's start with talking about how spring went. So to start with you have to start with the end to begin anew. And so that's kind of one of our major points that we want to make sure that you're keeping in mind, right? Did you look at any of your spring midterms or finals, right? A lot of challenges that we have with our own students is that we don't tend to look at our final exams on how we did, because a lot of times we're like, you know what, I just don't want to look at it anymore. It's too traumatic thinking about how last semester went. But I think it's important because you're going to be going into the next semesters probably still online and still probably with some of the same challenges. So we want to make sure that you're keeping those in mind when you're going into the summer so that you don't necessarily make the same mistakes and it becomes a cyclical problem. Okay? So I want you to take a moment. I want you to think about how spring went. Right? How did it go academically? How did it go in terms of building your career or towards your career, or did you even think about your career? And what happened personally? So I'm going to have Isa and Louise and Anu share later on. But I'll start with myself in terms of talking about kind of my own spring. Right. So as a director, right, I was trying to figure out how to balance going and being in a doctoral program, but also raising my 2-year-old, and also that my wife has we have a second child on the way. And so we're trying to figure out all of this, but at the same time, still working at home, right? And how that affected our relationships at home. And how do I still maintain balance when I can't leave the house? Those are things that I had to think about. So those were struggles that I had to make or think about as the semester went. But also it's where I had to start talking to a lot of my faculty a lot more because I needed help. I needed to find ways to really help balance all the things that were going on in my life, along with having a full-time job, right? Working on campus and working with students. So those were some of the things that I was encountering. Isa or Nu, do you mind sharing kind of what you experienced or things that you had to adjust from spring?
Yeah, so for me, although I'm not in school anymore, I've learned to kind of set goals personally and professionally. And I think one of the things that was challenging was kind of once we transitioned to online, I think a lot of students, and me included, everyone kind of felt down because we didn't know what was happening in the world. So I kind of lost track of my goals, and I didn't know how to find motivation to keep the things I wanted to do in mind, or how do I reach my goals when there's a pandemic and the world's ending, right? And so I think trying to find that and restructure my goals again was really challenging. And I think the hardest part was how do I reach out to my mentors when I can't really see them physically, and then trying to get used to that online environment. So that was a challenge for me.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd say the same for me in terms of motivation. I think transitioning to fully online was a challenge for me in general, because for me, I find online classes difficult. I think even as a grad student, and for me, I prefer in-person learning. But I think for me, it was also a good learning experience for me, because I think if I'm experiencing this, then that means our students are also experiencing this as well. So I think it helped me better learn how to support students that are also transitioning too. I think academically, I also lost motivation in the process of just trying to like finish assignments on time. And I think for me, it was also just reaching out to professors for extensions on assignments. So it really taught me to advocate for myself, especially when I knew that I was like, okay, I can't submit these assignments by this deadline, so I need to just reach out. So, yeah.
So, you know, what I heard from both of you, right, it was the idea that, one, there had to be some adjustments that need to be made as the semester was going on, but two, something you had to keep in check, and we saw, I think, with a lot of our own students, was motivation, right? Motivation. It's just like, I don't feel like doing any of this, right? And so we had to keep that in check and really like talk about what that looks like. And really, I think when we're talking about motivation, we kind of reset towards like, are these goals the most important things in our life right now, right? Are these the things that are really going to keep me motivated? So thank you too for sharing that again. Those are great points. So as you're thinking about your summer, right, I think things that they both mentioned were both were emotional, they were social, they were intellectual in terms of academically, how we were going to figure this out. They were environmental. We had to start thinking about kind of like our space around us. The fact that like we weren't driving anymore. I'm not driving to work at this point, right? Those are all things that you have to consider. But also physical, right? How do we make time or make sure we have time for physically? I think I noticed working at home, my eating schedule and sleeping schedule was off. It's still a little off that I still need to make adjustments. And then spiritual, right? How was I making time to kind of like help replenish my soul, my spirituality, right? What did that look like? And so all the things that kind of New and Isa talked about, and myself as well, were kind of tied into all of this. So that's part. So you want to have reflected and thought about your spring semester, your just spring in general. Even if you weren't a student in spring, really just want to think about how spring went. The next part that we want to think about when we talk about our goal planning is about relationships. So I'm not just saying like the relationships that affect you intimately, right? Those are potentially ones that affect you, but it's also about the relationships that are personal, your academic, and your career, right? So personally, what relationships were affecting you the most? Where did you need to start setting boundaries with people when it came to work and school? We have this example that I tend to always use, right? We had a student who was doing her a speech for class over Zoom, and all of a sudden one of her family members came in to say like, hey, do you want lunch? And while that was very innocent, it probably still affected their ability to do a speech all over Zoom. So what relationships do we need to kind of negotiate as that's kind of all happening? The academic piece. So I'll say this, is that the way that most of us use resources with academics is kind of like the way a lot of people tend to use the doctor, which is that they tend to go to tutoring or they tend to go to use the resources when there's an emergency or when there's a symptom coming up, right? When you're just like coughing like crazy and now you need to go to the doctor. That tends to be what happens with academics, is that, okay, I'll finally go to tutoring, or I'll finally go to a counselor, or I'll finally get go to a mentor last minute as an emergency. What we want to help you think about is, what relations should you have used early on proactively and that are maybe tied to one of your goals, right? So we want to make sure that you're using all those things proactively rather than just kind of last minute. And some of it can be ego. Some of it can be like, you know, I don't need those things. I didn't need it in high school. I didn't need it at my previous job. I don't need resources. But let's just keep in mind, right, that you're already paying for all these things anyways. So use the resources that you can to your full advantage. And then if you don't need it later on, then we'll make that decision. The last part, which I think may be easier for other people to understand, is your career, right? So a lot of careers nowadays, you kind of need to build your network. It's about who you know. And so that's not necessarily tied always to a class curriculum or a program curriculum that you're a part of at the college. So you're sometimes going to have to proactively build those relationships and internships kind of on your own. So those are things to think about in terms of how well did you do all those things in the spring, right? So along with kind of thinking about your overall wellness, we're also thinking about the relationships you were building or were like affected, right? Either negatively or positively affected during the spring. Okay, so now that we have all those things, we've thought about spring, we've thought about reflecting, we've thought about environment, we've thought about relationships. I think now we have all the necessary information to now go, okay, what are some goals we want to accomplish? And so Isa and you both referred to goals, both short-term and long-term goals, but also making sure that your short-term goals and your long-term goals are connected somehow or some way, right? So this is the way we break it up. So the top left is short-term professional and learning, right? So your academics and your career. The right side is about your short-term personal, your family, community, knowing fully well that our personal lives, our family lives, our community lives end up affecting kind of how we do academically. And the last things that I also want to put there are the long-term. These are the long-term professional, right? What kind of career you're trying to get into. What kind of things you're trying to get better at academically long-term, but also your short-term personal, family, and community, right? What are some things you want to do? Do you want to pick up another language? Do you want to build relationships? Like, what are the things that you want to do? Do you want to do community service, right? Let's think about all those things. So let me give you all an example by kind of showing what I've done. So, as long as the team can still see my screen, right? Okay, so these are my short-term and long-term goals. So kind of talking about some of the issues that have been happening recently, I also wanted to find ways to kind of still make sure that I was thinking about like what was going on in the world and how we wanted to kind of think about that. So for me, I'm in a doctoral program. So one of the things I needed to figure out were 2 research questions that I wanted to answer. And I should probably have that done before the summer ends. Second part was really developing study groups for 2 of my classes. One of the classes I already have a study group for, but maybe I need to have a little bit stronger of a study group in the next one. And so that was an assessment about my relationships, was that I don't think I was as close to my cohort as I wanted to be or utilize them enough. And then for me, it was also professionally was to submit a conference on predictive analytics. Predictive analytics, I don't think it's necessarily important to know about the topic, but know that that's what I was trying to accomplish. And then long-term, as a part of that, right, I noticed that a lot of what we're doing is over video. And I am not a YouTuber. I don't know how to do those things, but I know it's going to become important in terms of video editing skills. So that's a long-term goal I have in mind. I want to develop a blog for Asian American Pacific Islander kind of higher education practitioners. I myself identify as Filipino American, so a lot of what I tend to do or exchange is really from the lens of being Asian American. So we tend to look at that. I tend to look at that for how I can develop more resources for people long term. And then I wanted to read, and I apologize for writing that incorrectly, but it's one book on program evaluation. So that was really for me. I was like, okay, I want to do this better for my work. And I need to kind of revisit what I kind of took from grad school and go, okay, so am I still kind of applying things well through program evaluation? So going over to my short term, on the other hand, is thinking about kind of 2 books on anti-racism, right? So I think we're in a place now, as we're talking a lot in the world, especially with the death of George Floyd, that it's not enough to be just not racist, but how do we kind of promote a world and a society where we're anti-racist, and we're thinking about equality, and we're thinking about how I can do that better in my own life, but also in terms of work. The other thing is that because of the social distancing and all these other things, I don't think I've been as well connected with people. So I wanted to get in touch with 2 family members from the Philippines that I haven't necessarily talked to. And some of that may be based on like my apprehensions kind of engaging with my own like level of Filipino in terms of language, but also just me making the time for that. And then my son is 2. One of the things I want to do short term is really help him grasp some more words. So at least 10 words for him. And then the other ones are long-term, which is develop a reading group for my family. So that was also one of the ways I wanted to get in touch with my family and really start kind of having the conversations that I think tie into short-term 1 and 2 on anti-racism, also connecting to family. Because I notice a lot of them want to talk about things. So I'm like, okay, well, this is a way to do this. long-term wise, and I realized I didn't necessarily connect this well with my short-term, right, is lose 10 pounds. I think I got that COVID-19 weight that I want to kind of work off, being indoors. But I also want to cook 10 new recipes. Those are things that I kind of want to do long-term within the next year or so. So those are kind of, I want to provide examples, right? For me, this is based on my lens and my experience and what I'm trying to accomplish based on how spring went, or how even before spring. That's kind of what what I was thinking about. I'm gonna go back to the team. Do you all have any kind of short-term goals that you want to share that are tied back to your spring, or things that you want to just talk about? Maybe one for each category.
So one for each category. I'll start with professional. With like all of the things that have been happening in the world, this was kind of already part of my goal, but I had to restructure it. I want to just write a paper or a reflection about my take on social justice and my philosophy of it, what it means to me, and how I can incorporate that into my work moving forward. And then a long-term goal that was connected to that was to join some kind of social justice, like community organization or campus organization, just so that I can practice what I'm writing about and my viewpoint. And then personal, one of them, short term, was to read one book about finance, and then my long term goal was to develop a 5 to 10 year plan, financial plan, about like what that would look like for me personally. So that meant like exploring what I had read in the book, and then how do I apply that into my long-term goal. So yeah.
Thank you.
So for me, I realized when I wrote my short-term goals, I completed 2 out of the 3 that I wrote down in spring. So one of them was to confirm my thesis committee. So I confirmed that by the end of spring. I also confirmed my fieldwork placement. So I'll be doing my placement at Golden West. And then my third one that I'm currently still working on is solidify a community college position. So I've already submitted my application, so just waiting on that. In terms of long term, complete my chapters 1 through 5. No, not 1 through, yeah, long term. Complete chapters 1 through 5. And then short-term personal, it's more financially related. So save $100 a month, and then long-term connected to that is save $1,200 by May 2021.
So I want to point out, so thank you, Issa. Like, they did a much better job of connecting their short-term and long-term kind of goals with one another. If you wasn't completely sure what Issa was talking about, she's talking about grad school, right? She's talking about her research, thinking about like her dissertation. So all of that stuff is amazing. So just if anybody wanted to clarify or talk about that, okay, so we're keeping in mind. So at this point of the workshop, you want to make sure that you have kind of at least one, like we have 3 here kind of listed as things that you would like, and we'll attach the PDF to this, hopefully when we put the link up, so that you can see those things. But you can also all see these resources on our IRC Canvas shell, which we will give you kind of enrollment information at the end. Okay. So this is the next step. So we've established what your goals are going to be for the summer and for the year. Great. Now we need to talk about how you're going to make the adjustments. So when you're going through the semester, it's really easy to be very optimistic at the beginning of the semester, before kind of like all the stuff kind of starts happening to you throughout the semester. So we want to make sure is that you're having time to reflect. So when we're talking about reflection, we're talking about reflecting back on our goals, right? So just not reflecting back on the drama in our lives, right? Or just kind of the issues of the week. We're always going back to our goals and thinking about how well was I able to accomplish my goals, and what was getting in the way of that, or what do I need to use to improve. So the best thing to do is when we're stressed out, sometimes we're like, I don't have time to reflect. It's important to kind of put that in your schedule, because sometimes when our response to stress is that we don't have time to reflect or kind of look at our well-being, and that's important for us to keep that in mind. So think about like when you're going to reflect. For me, I like Saturday mornings. I like going outside. I bring out my journal. I look at my planner, and then go, okay, so what happened? What went well this week, and what didn't go well this week in the context of my goals? Always revisiting my goals, right? And I'm outside. I kind of take the time to really think about what that looks like, and then I start writing about it, about what kind of adjustments I need to make. How about for Issa and Nu, like, when do you all reflect?
I like to reflect on Sundays because for me Sundays feels like the end of a week, and so usually towards the evening I'll do a similar thing. I will revisit my goals for the week, what I hit, what I didn't, and then I plan how I can restructure my goals into the next coming week. So Monday is always the start of my week, and then I kind of just restart that cycle, and then always just readjusting from whatever goals I didn't hit, thinking about like what distracted me that week, or like and what I did well. I also try to do self-care reflection about like what I'm grateful for too, just so that I'm not always too focused on like what didn't go well. So yeah, that's kind of my process.
Good. So you're not really just trying to focus on being task oriented, right? You're trying to think about those other parts of your well-being, that wellness wheel. Good, great, thank you.
So for me, I also like to reflect on Sundays. I also use a passion planner, which kind of helps me stay on track with what I need to do. I've also incorporated a gratitude like journal, and so I actually have an accountability partner who's helped me kind of stay on top of or stay grounded in things that I'm grateful for, because I think sometimes we can get lost in the work, and I think just within these past couple of weeks, or just even these past couple of months, it's been difficult, but I think it's important to have those folks that can keep you grounded and stay focused, but also just check in with ourselves too. So.
Great. As you can tell, the team is very introspective. They like to reflect, they make adjustments, right? This is kind of like the way they were trained, but also the way they approach their lives, right? But also, that's a great idea, accountability partners. That's a really great idea. So the next question we have to ask, right, is about when are you going to act? And really it means like, what is your plan? What does your goal look like? You need to have a plan, and the plan that incorporates both your relationships and how well the week went, right? Because I think if we don't keep those in mind, we're just going to keep making the same mistakes, right? And what I noticed for a lot of students is that, and this kind of ties back to the reflection, is I'll ask them, so what didn't go well? And they're like, I didn't do this. Didn't really do this. I'm like, okay, well, what do you want to do to make adjustments? I just need to do it. And if I do it, then things will be fixed. And I think the question really is not really about like, when are you going to do it? The question really is about why weren't you able to do it in the first place? And what will you need to do to prioritize it, right? Was something else in the way? Or maybe you not have the time? Is it realistic? I think when you look back at your goals, you have to then say, it's okay to make adjustments to your goals, as long as you're willing to be honest and realistic about what kind of goals you're trying to accomplish. So when are you going to act? What does that look like? What does your environment look like? Is that really the best environment for you to do? I know that we're all doing it personally at home. So, how are you making your home environment kind of more conducive to your success, right? So you want to make sure you have a plan for every one of your goals. How about you all? Like, are there certain things that you have to keep in mind when you're acting with your stuff? Like, are there things that you just know about yourself that are like, okay, this is what I need to do in terms of my own plans?
I think I resonate with what you said earlier. I think being a student, and maybe the first few months of starting this job, I didn't really know how to like reflect correctly, or like why I wasn't starting my goals, because I would say similar things about like because I'd have like one-on-one check-ins with Renee, and then I would figure out that like, oh, I haven't done any of these things, but I would say similar things like, oh, I just need to start it. But I think it was really about reflecting about why I couldn't do it, and what I needed to do in order to kind of get that process going. And going into a year, I guess, of this job has definitely helped me to understand what that process looks like, in terms of like setting goals, reflecting, structuring. So that would be it for me.
Yeah. I think even adding on to the reflection piece is like including others in my reflection, because I think sometimes when I go through this reflection process, I also have to like tell my family like, hey, like I need time to like work on this, and so I can't help you like go to the store. So I think for me, it's like the letting others know like this is what I'm trying to focus on, and I need you to like give you my space. So I think when we talk about boundaries, I think it's something that I have to constantly remind folks, especially the folks that I live with, so that when they know I'm focusing on something, they know what's on my plate, and they know that there's a balance between.
Right. Maybe you need to give them your planner, right? So
They
they
have it.
so those are great examples, right? They're thinking about reflection, but also thinking about whether they're reflecting. And I don't know if I want to use the word correctly, right? But we're making sure that we're reflecting on the things that we need to focus on based on our priorities. I think what I noticed is in terms of like when you're going to act is to break it down into more digestible kind of pieces or tasks so you don't get overwhelmed. And I'll give you an example, right? So I have a friend, older friend, who's gonna write a book about all the species, and there's like over 1,000 species of birds in Wisconsin, and I was like, that's such like a daunting task. Like, how are you going to do that? And she responded, one bird at a time. I was like, oh, duh, that makes sense, right? But you just get overwhelmed by the whole task. It's also funny because they're looking at birds, right? So that's also one of those things. I have funny friends. So those are things that we're thinking about, and want to make sure that you're just making it and breaking it down into more digestible pieces. So while you have your goal, all your goals are like broken down a little bit more on a daily in terms of what those tasks look like. Okay, so this is going to be our process for the summer. We're going to have our goals, but we're also going to make the reflection time, right? On what that looks like, looking at all of the whole wellness wheel, all the balance that we need to make, but also in terms of making the adjustments, right? So what are our adjustments going to look like from a day-to-day basis, right? When are you going to make those adjustments? When are you going to reflect? It's not helpful if you're just journaling, but then not making any of the adjustments. And that can easily happen with journaling, right? Because you're just venting. And the whole point we want to do is that you're not just venting, you're thinking about how I'm feeling, but also what do I want to do as my next step, and not just kind of dwell in like, I can't do anything. So when we're putting it all together, we're also looking at all of the steps that we just talked about. So one, looking at the end, looking at the spring's end. How did that go? Always start with that. Don't ever deny that that's not happening or affecting your life. Two, looking at the relationships in your life. You're always going to do the tasks and the things that you feel like you need to work on, your strengths and challenges, but let's think about the relationships, both academically, personally, and even career, right? In terms of what relationships are affecting you. And then once we've developed that kind of assessment about how that went, we then now look into our goals. Issa just said something very, very, I want to go back to, right? Which was that she reflected back on her spring goals. So if you have your spring goals, write down those goals and then write your assessment of yourself in that context. So how were the relationships, and how did spring go in the context of your old goals, right? What was getting in the way of that? The next part is about the action and reflection. So now that you're in the semester, right? Now that we're in the middle of summer, or actually the beginning of summer, now we're going to think about when are you going to reflect? Right? Are you going to reflect on weekends, in the middle of the week? For some people, you'll ideally want it to be a certain time, but then you'll notice based on the pattern of the week or your cycle, like maybe it's just better in the middle of the week to reflect. Sometimes that happens to us, right? Or sometimes we'll go, Sunday passed, I can't reflect. I'll just reflect next Sunday. But that's not necessarily helpful to anybody, right? So make the time when you can reflect, even if it's past the time that you wanted it to be. Remember that this isn't going to be perfect. And that you're going to slowly get better at this. So just keep that in mind, right? That's the whole point of action reflection, is not to make sure that's perfect, but to make sure that you're slowly getting better at all these things. The next piece is go to other workshops. I put just in there Summer of Wellness, and I wanted it to stand out because we're going to have all these other workshops throughout the year, but particularly this summer. So take advantage of it, right? If you wrote financial goals, go to the FAFSA and the financial literacy workshops, right? If you're thinking about your career, go to how to get an internship workshop. But I want to make sure you're not just going to the workshop because your other friends are going there necessarily, right? But also because these are tied to your goals, and I need these workshops as resources to help me accomplish my goals. And the last part we can talk about is the IRC Canvas shell. So we have all these resources, we have all these tools, we have the 4 square goals on our Canvas shell. We have plenty of other things that you can look at, other ideas. The team has put a lot of work into the Canvas shell, and there's a lot of students using it from the college, so please go ahead and take a look at it. And so as we visited, when we talked about our goals, I want you to look at what are some of the workshops that are kind of tied into what we're doing. The next ones that are actually coming up are the Coming Together dialogues. So that's us talking about kind of the recent shootings of George Floyd and several other kind of black people that were affected by all this stuff, right? And so how we as a society are going to be adjusting. And so we're going to make those dialogues open for students. Self-care, financial literacy, the internship, as I just mentioned. So think about how all of these things affect our wellness wheel, which is at the top, but also how that affects your goals and which ones you think will be the most important. Some things I also want to mention, right, are about all the different workshops on the FAFSA are in different languages, so those will be there. All the wellness stuff, the mental and physical well-being, the transferring, but also the Coastline 101, so you can actually know all those resources, so you can navigate and utilize all those things rather than just trying to find it last minute. And the last piece is that the social one, which is about Coastline trivia. So that'll be a trivia night and a game night. We're gonna get to know one another. So please, if you don't mind, come on in. We'll introduce you to more students, more staff, more faculty. Make sure you get started start right at Coastline, okay? And this, as I brought up last time, is about the IRC Canvas shell. So I put the link at the bottom. I know it's not going to be clickable over Zoom. Hopefully we'll find ways to kind of attach this to this video, so we post it on our landing page. But if you want, go ahead and click on that link or find that link and go ahead and enroll. So that's our enrollment link that you can do to our Canvas shell. So you can look at different resources, events, mentors. Isa is a mentor for our program. Actually, both of them are mentors for our program. So if you want to have a mentor to kind of help you with that goal planning process, these two are available. We have other students available for that, along with resources and just kind of looking at things in different lenses, both culturally and different forms of identity. So once again, thank you. I put the link, and I apologize about how long this link is. We were trying to find ways to do that, and I didn't get the chance to kind of make a bit.ly to kind of shorten the link. But we'll make sure we kind of put that link somewhere. If you don't mind, go ahead and fill that evaluation out in terms of like how well it went, if you think this was helpful. So we'd appreciate any feedback on how we can make these adjustments throughout the summer, but also how we can use this for the rest of the year. Okay, but thank you for attending our workshop. I think that's about it. Do you have any kind of last comments, Isa or New, in terms of our students or staff or faculty who are going to be viewing this workshop?
I would just say goal planning. I think it's pretty unique, and if you can pick up on how to improve upon it, it will be very beneficial. It's funny because I feel like I've learned how to goal plan better as a professional than as a student. So I would really just encourage students at least to really take that time to practice this so you can get better at it as you move on with your life as a professional, even after school. So.
Great.
I agree. Goal planning has really taught me to break down my goals into like a tangible task. And I think it's a good skill to have, especially as a professional or just even as a student, especially when it comes to us supporting students and even our own programming. And that when we focus in on goals, it'll help us be better at our work.
Great points. Thank you all. So please take all this advice. You can always talk to them, follow up with them through the Canvas shell. You can contact us through the links. I put mine, but I also put the general IRC. So if you want to contact any of them, we can also follow up through those. I also put our Facebook. You can put that just facebook.com, and then that's the the later part of the link, so IRC at Coastline. And then you can also join us on our Instagram. New posts, a lot of stuff on Instagram stories and kind of messages on the kind of upcoming events and resources or things that you're all thinking about. And that will be at IRC Coastline. So have a good rest of your day, everybody. I'm hoping this workshop was very helpful for you all. All right. Thank you and have a good rest of your day.